Welcome to Affluent Cancers and Diet, Unraveling the Confusion. Hi, Peter Strauss is my name. I'm a technician, and technicians like to fix things. After a health scare, I've started to look at human health and found many areas that can be improved. This presentation deals with our high affluent cancer rates. Other diseases like diabetes type 2, heart disease, and some autoimmune diseases have already been halted and many times reversed through the low-fat, whole plant-based diet advocated by doctors like Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. John McDougall, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Neil Barnard, and others. Cancer I see as the last frontier that needs some more attention and cleaning up of the confusion. How much of a problem is cancer actually? If we look at the age standardized rate for all cancers, excluding non-melanoma skin cancers, Australia has the third highest incident rate on the planet. The US occupies number 6. 29.1% of Australians die from cancer, which is nearly 1 in 3, while in the US it's nearly 1 in 4. It is the second most common cause of death and a rather unpleasant way to go. All countries have significant cancer rates, but the cancer types often differ between countries, and the rates for different cancers over time can change as well as countries develop. There must be something we can learn from the differences. There are significant differences between the cancers of the poor and the cancers of the rich. How do we achieve the lowest rates of the cancers of the poor and the lowest rates of the cancers of the rich? What could this low-fat, whole plant-based diet that stops and often reverses diabetes type 2, heart disease, and some autoimmune diseases, what could that do for cancer, and how would it work? I'm a technician, and I need to understand processes. Please come along for the journey. First, let's have a look at cancer rate differences. Here we see the US total cancer death rate since 1900. We can see that the rates have gone up fourfold over a century. Some types actually went down over this period, while others went up even more. Here we see age-standardized melanoma skin cancer mortality rates from the World Health Organization. Age-standardized means we can compare different countries as different age profiles have been adjusted for. Melanoma is high in the US, Canada, Europe, and Australia, and significantly lower in the tropical areas. It looks like there might be more to melanoma than UV sunshine. Here we see age-standardized liver cancer mortality rates. These are high in big parts of Asia and Africa. Liver cancer has been strongly linked to infections like hepatitis B and C, and also to aflatoxin, a fungal product that loves starches. Here we see age-standardized brain cancer mortality rates. Again, they appear higher in the more affluent countries like melanoma was, although my 72-country study did not pick this one up. And here we see age-standardized breast cancer mortality rates. China is noticeably lower than many other parts of the world. In some parts of China in the early 1970s, they found incident rates of less than half per 100,000 per year, while for instance Belgium has an incident rate of 111 per 100,000 per year, a 200-fold difference. Here we see age-standardized cervical mortality rates. Cervical cancer has been linked to human papillomavirus. Here we see male stomach cancer differences in China in 1973. Stomach cancer has been linked to a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. This slide has colon cancer mortality rates. These tend to be higher in the affluent countries. Here we have age-standardized lung cancer mortality rates. Please note the fairly high value for Norway. If we look at the Norwegian cigarette consumption per capita, it actually does not appear to be all that high compared to other countries. It is actually one of the lowest in Europe. Here we look at cancer trends in China. Please note the solid line with the red dots going up from 1973 till 2004, which represents lung cancer rates. Interestingly, the Chinese cigarette consumption per capita stabilized in 1990, and if anything might have come down slightly. Japan has a very high smoking rate of nearly 50% of the population, but still holds the longevity record on the planet. Looking at the Japanese, the Chinese, the Norwegian experiences, there might be more to lung cancer than just smoking. On this slide, we see the liver cancer rates go up in China in a period that actually hepatitis B infection rates were coming down. Here we see a study that tells us that the hepatitis B infection rates actually came down over that period. In 1979, they were 8.75%. They went up a little in 1992, which is 13 years later, only to come down by 2006 to lower levels than in 1979. The study shows the effect of the immunization program. However, while immunization was successful, the liver cancer rates kept on going up significantly. There appears to be much more to liver cancer than hepatitis B. There are many in time and place contrasting cancer rate observations we cannot explain at this stage. Our diet has often been blamed for high cancer rates. China's diet is changing fast. What in the diet could possibly be promoting cancers? Could diet be modulating cancers? Could it be amplifying cancer rates, to say this in a different way? Let's have a closer look at diet. The human diet can be divided into three groups: animal-based food, plant-based food, and processed food. The animal food contains proteins, fats or oils, animal hormones, and sometimes calcium, like in milk, and some vitamin B12. The plant-based food contains proteins, in general very little fats or oils with the exception from some seeds and nuts, vitamins but not B12, minerals, fiber, starches, and antioxidants. Processed food definitely does not belong to our historical diet. Processed food is always made from either animal-based, plant-based, or as a mixture of sorts of these two. That raises the question, since all ingredients come from plants and animals, what in a plant-based and or animal-based food could possibly be giving us increased cancer rates? If we look at all cancer research that is related to diet, we find research associating cancer with animal-based food like red meat, the animal protein, animal fats, and animal hormones. We see also some possibly linked to plant fats and oils. Which group could be the main cancer stimulator? Well, hormones are our body's regulators. Could we have inadvertently upset the natural balance and regulation, leading to higher cancer rates through exposing ourselves to more and more of these hormones? Aren't hormones broken down in our digestive tract? Well, the contraceptive pill and HRT are oral hormonal medications that are obviously not broken down as they do their job. Hence, that idea that is often heard appears to be incorrect. Let's have a closer look at hormones. In medical science, they talk about endogenous and exogenous hormones. Endogenous are the ones produced by our own body, and the exogenous hormones are the extra ones we can get through our food or medication. Which hormones are we actually talking about? Which hormones have been found in research to be linked to higher cancer rates? Well, all of the following hormones have been linked to increased cancer rates in research: estrogen, progesterone, prolactin, testosterone, IGF-1, and somatropin. This might not be a complete list, as I'm not an endocrinologist nor an oncologist. I'm just a technician poking around researching cancer. One of these hormones, estrogen, has even been labeled by the World Health Organization as a class 1 human carcinogen, meaning that it's definitely carcinogenic to humans. That raises the question, how can something that our own bodies produce be carcinogenic? Let's go back to that list of carcinogenic hormones. Perhaps that gives us a clue. What do these hormones linked to increased cancer rates have in common? Estrogen is responsible for endometrial, uterine, vaginal wall, bone formation, and puberty growth. Progesterone promotes growth of the endometrium, cervix, and breasts. Testosterone promotes height growth and bone and muscle development. Prolactin promotes milk production and mammary gland enlargement. IGF-1 stimulates cell growth and proliferation. And somatropin stimulates cell growth and IGF-1 production in our glands, and it builds muscles and bones. While each one of them promotes growth of sorts. Cancerous growth too, of course. This could be more than coincidence. Is it only these hormones we've just looked at that promote growth? Well, no. There is actually nearly 40 growth factors as well. These are other proteins also stimulating growth. One of them, VEGF, promotes the growth of new blood vessels. Without a new blood supply bringing nutrients and oxygen, the cancer would be severely hampered in its development. VEGF has also been linked to increased cancer rates, and so have some of the other growth factors. Well, it's time for our hypothesis and test it, as we now have 45 to 50 known factors in the standard omnivorous diet that promote growth and could promote cancer. Here is our hypothesis. The natural hormones stimulating growth and the growth factors coming from the animal-based food are the main cause of our high affluent cancer rates. Our main exogenous hormone factors are meat, dairy, and milk yield. Minor ones are medication, fish, and seafood. Most people eat much more meat and dairy than fish and seafood. We can also get some hormones from medication. The milk yield is an interesting one. Dairy contains the animal's hormones just like meat does. However, as countries get more industrialized, their milk yield per cow per year goes up through selecting cows for high milk yields. This milk yield is controlled through hormones. Hence, we are selecting the cows for higher hormone levels. Another factor increasing milk hormone levels is milking during pregnancy, as pregnancy is a time of increased hormone levels. All this while cow's milk is already higher in hormone levels than human breast milk, as calves need to grow up much faster so they can keep up with the herd. From the total cancer research presented here, it would appear that out of the three major factors listed that increase our extra hormone intake, milk yield in the industrialized countries is actually the biggest factor. Cancer research has divided cancers into about 200 different cancer types. When looking at the cancer-food relationship, the food is often divided into fats and proteins, etc. This research here considers all cancers that occur in the more affluent countries as one group. This group has been called the affluent cancers. All these affluent cancers have a certain link to the animal-based food. We do not look at food detail either, like fats and proteins. We look at the big picture. This means we look at animal or plant-based food. Looking at just fats or proteins in cancer research, I believe, is actually bad science. The animal fats will come with some animal hormones, and the plant fats will come with some plant hormones. Making the assumption that this would not matter is potentially dangerous. Good science will try hard to avoid any assumptions. Which cancers are linked to our animal-based diet? They are what I've called the affluent cancers: breast, prostate, colon, uterine, ovarian, testicular, pancreatic, melanoma, lung, kidney, bladder, thyroid, Hodgkin lymphoma, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, leukemia, and multiple myeloma. This list was created by analyzing for animal food consumption associations. The data is from the World Health Organization, which had divided cancers into 27 different cancer locations in the body. So how could we find out if these high affluent cancer rates are caused by or contributed to by the growth factors coming from consuming animal-based food? That sort of problem was addressed when linking smoking to lung cancer. Richard Dole and Austin Bradford Hill developed what is now known as the Bradford Hill criteria. These are basically 9 different scientific perspectives we can use to look at epidemiological research. The final evidence for something to be causational in epidemiology is a product of the results of these 9 different perspectives. If all or most perspectives come back with a positive result, the likelihood that something is causational becomes high. As you can imagine, the tobacco industry fought very hard not to be associated with lung cancer, and was still in denial even 30 years after science had strongly established that, given all evidence, the most likely cause for most lung cancers was indeed smoking tobacco. The evidence had come from looking at these possible associations from all possible angles. We will go through the Bradford Hill criteria one by one and come up with an assessment for the likelihood of our hypothesis being correct. We will look at the association's strength, consistency, dose response, and temporality, the order in which things happen. We will also look at experimental reducibility or reversibility, coherence of theory, biological plausibility, specificity, how specific the association is, and we will have a look for analogy with other observations. First, we will look at the strength of association. The Nurses' Health studies found links between meat intake and both breast cancer and colon cancer. The World Health Organization labeled red meat as probably carcinogenic to humans. The associations were mainly observed in colorectal cancer, but also in pancreatic and prostate. Processed meat was labeled by the World Health Organization as definitely carcinogenic. The China study found a definite correlation between animal-based food and cancer rates in general. Only about 15% of smokers get lung cancer, and only if they keep on smoking their whole lives. About 5% of people that ever smoke get lung cancer. The strongest associations of exogenous hormones and growth factors from animals influencing affluent cancer rates are nearly double this rate. More than 1/4 of Australians will die from one of the affluent cancers. This means that the association is stronger than the smoking lung cancer link. I've done my own affluent cancer studies using World Health Organization data for 72 countries, which covers 1/3 to half of the world's population. This study gave a strong association between the affluent cancer rates and exogenous hormones coming from the animal food in the human diet. The countries consuming the most meat and dairy and had the highest milk yield were found to have 7 times higher affluent cancer rates compared to the countries consuming the lowest levels. Conclusion: there's definite associations between growth factors from animal-based food and affluent cancer rates. This appears to be the first time that cancers associated with animal-based food were grouped together as affluent cancers. We will continue with Bradford Hill criteria number 2, consistency of association. First, we will look at growth. If hormones promoting growth and growth factors are associated with more cancer, does it mean there are further associations between human growth and cancer rates? That is indeed the case. Taller people within one population have been associated with higher affluent cancer rates. Higher affluent cancer rates between populations have been associated with taller populations. Populations with women with bigger breasts have higher rates of affluent cancers, breast cancer in particular. Endometriosis, an unwanted uterine growth outside the uterus, has been linked to increased ovarian cancer rates, which is another one of the affluent cancers. People that are heavier have a bigger chance to get an affluent cancer. Heavier also means more body cells, which in turn is a sign of growth. Being overweight is a risk factor for most affluent cancers, really. So there are fairly clear growth and affluent cancer rate associations. We are still on consistency of association. This time we look at meat and dairy consumption. If hormones promoting growth and growth factors mainly come from meat and dairy, do we find a consistent meat and dairy consumption link with the affluent cancers? Well, there are not many studies out there approaching cancer this way, but between all 72 countries studied, there was a remarkable consistent ratio of affluent cancers over exogenous hormones. As the meat and dairy consumption went up, so did the affluent cancer rates. All 15 countries researched for increases in meat and dairy consumption over time were found to have an affluent cancer rate increase as well. There are consistencies with big studies like the China study, nurses' health studies, and World Health Organization studies, as these studies link some of the affluent cancers to animal food consumption. And I'll mention one more. There appears to be both consistencies and inconsistencies with hormonal medication studies. Studies done in India and China found strong connections between hormonal abortions and breast cancer, and the contraceptive pill and breast cancer, while in Europe these connections are often not encountered at all. Now, this inconsistency is actually consistent with the notion that the already higher hormone load in the affluent European countries consuming a strong animal-based diet is swamping the smaller influence coming from the medication, making the changes in cancer rates there harder to detect. Conclusion: there are consistent associations between affluent cancers and both growth and meat and dairy consumption. Moving on to Bradford-Hill criteria number 3, specificity of association. This is a big one, as there is a lot to consider. How specific is the growth factor association with the affluent cancers? What about other associations? Here we will consider all major cancer risk factors that have been identified: genetics, pollution, pesticides, chemicals, diagnostics and record keeping, longer lifespans, aging, alcohol, infections, weight and obesity, smoking, diet, hormones and growth factors. How specific are hormones and growth factors, considering there are so many other factors that might influence cancer rates? Let us consider them one by one. We will be asking ourselves if each of those risk factors possibly could be a major factor behind the high affluent cancer rates. Let's first look at genetics. Could genetics be a major drive behind the high affluent cancer rates? The China study found cancer variations of 100-fold in the homogeneous Chinese population. Genetically, the Chinese are all very similar, but despite that, there were very big differences observed in some of the affluent cancer rates. Also, we find very high affluent cancer rates in migrant countries like Australia, US, Canada, with a genetically diverse population. We conclude that while genetics will be a factor in cancers, genetics appear not to be a major drive behind the high affluent cancer rates. This gives us hope. We are not all predestined to die from a slow, painful death. Could pollution, pesticides or chemicals be a major drive behind the high affluent cancer rates? The China study found cancer rate variations up to 100 times in unpolluted rural China in the early 1970s. That means they found high cancer rates in probably low pollution areas. This does not support the idea that pollution is a major drive behind the high affluent cancer rates. The only cancer link the China study found was really with the animal-based food. Another point is that the pollution keeps on accumulating in the affluent countries, but cancer rates have plateaued out about 25 years ago. So pollution still goes up, but the cancer rates have stabilized a long time ago. Again, this does not support the idea that pollution is a major drive behind the high affluent cancer rates. Most of these industries we find in cities, hence we could expect more pollution there. However, within cultures, the rural-urban differences are normally only small. The bigger differences are normally encountered between different countries and cultures. Long-standing polluted Japan has significantly lower affluent cancer rates. We conclude that while there will be a factor in cancer rates, pollution, pesticides and chemicals appear not to be as strongly associated with the high affluent cancer rates. Our diagnostics and record-keeping issues are a major reason behind the high affluent cancer rate differences on the planet. Are the poor countries not good at diagnosing and keeping records? Migrants moving to more affluent countries have much lower affluent cancer rates. Both affluent and poor countries measure much lower affluent cancer rates around the time of the move. The China study did not find diagnostics and record-keeping issues. It found the diet was the main factor in cancer rate differences. Dr. John McDougall reports much lower rates of affluent cancers in first-generation migrants on Hawaii, and that being linked to diet. Cancers of the poor, like liver cancer, are often measured to be much higher in the poorer countries than in the affluent countries, indicating that poor countries have at least some diagnostics and record-keeping skills. While it will be a factor in the measured cancer rates, diagnostics and record-keeping appear not to be strongly linked to the high affluent cancer rates at all. Is perhaps living longer or aging a main drive behind our high affluent cancer rates? While we get somewhat higher cancer rates as we age, do we get high affluent cancer rates because we get older? If we remove the influence of the infant and childhood mortality rates by working out the life expectancy at the age of 5, we get the following table. Life expectancy at the age of 5 in the USA is 80. And the affluent cancer rate is 380. Life expectancy at the age of 5 in China is 78, and the affluent cancer rates for China is only 117. Life expectancy at the age of 5 in Vietnam is 78, with an affluent cancer rate of only 88. We see very similar life expectancies in Vietnam and China compared to the USA. But their age-standardized affluent cancer rates are only a fraction of what they are in the US. We conclude that while aging will be a factor in cancers, aging does not appear to be strongly associated with the high affluent cancers at all. Is alcohol a main driver behind the high affluent cancer rates? We can see Russia with very high alcohol consumption having only a middling affluent cancer rate. We see Turkey having a similar affluent cancer rate to Russia with a very low alcohol consumption. We see Italy having a high affluent cancer rate with only moderate alcohol consumption, while Vietnam, with a similar consumption of alcohol, achieves much lower affluent cancer rates. That doesn't mean alcohol is not associated with any cancer type, it's just not strongly associated with the 18 affluent cancers as a group. We conclude that while it will be a factor in some cancers, alcohol is not strongly associated with the affluent cancers as a group. Could infections be a major drive behind affluent cancer rates? Research has only found the following links between cancers and infections. Liver cancer has been linked to hepatitis B and C. Liver cancer has also been linked to aflatoxin, which is a fungal product. Cervical cancer, esophageal cancer, oropharynx, and lung cancers have been linked to the human papillomavirus. Kaposi sarcoma has been linked to the human herpes virus. Number 8. Stomach cancer has been linked to Helicobacter pylori, bacteria, and bladder cancer has been linked to cystosoma, or it's also called bilharzia, which is caused by a parasite. All these are cancers of the poor. there have been no strong associations found with the cancers of the affluent. While infections have been linked to cancers of the poor, infections have not been strongly associated with the affluent cancers at all. This makes sense, as the affluent countries have their sanitation, hygiene, immunization, and antibiotics very much under control. Is obesity strongly associated with affluent cancers? In this graph, we see obesity starting to climb in the US in 1978 and continuing till 2008. That's the yellow line there. Here we see the cancer mortality rates increasing till 1990 and then even coming down slightly. We saw the US cancer rates leveling off in 1990, while obesity kept on climbing till 2008, which is another 18 years more. While overweight people have more chance to get cancer, obesity appears to be not strongly associated with the affluent cancers. Smoking has been linked to the following affluent cancers: lung, pancreas, kidney, bowel, ovarian, bladder, and leukemia. If all these associations were to be causational, the increase caused by these risk factors would be about 18% of the affluent cancers. While this is a significant percentage, 18% worst case is only small compared to the 700% differences through the animal diet, as we will see later. The conclusion is that smoking is only a minor contributor to the affluent cancer rates, not a major one. Here we look at diet, specifically the amount of animal food consumed. This graph has the estimated normalized hormone load from eating animals from 72 countries and their affluent cancer rates. The 72 countries cover about 1/3 to half of the world population. We see an about 7-fold affluent cancer rate difference between the highest and the lowest animal-based food intake. Is there a connection between rising animal food consumption and rising affluent cancers? Here we see the US meat consumption nearly double between 1900 and 2000. Here we see the cheese consumption in the US going up between 1970 and 2012. Here we see the average milk production per cow go up in the US between 1965 and 2010. Hence, we find evidence that all three major factors increasing extra hormonal intake have been going up over the years. The association between animal food in the diet and affluent cancers definitely appears significant, as cancer rates did increase as well. Looking at both static and dynamic situations, the association between animal food consumption and affluent cancers definitely appears significant. We will have a look at hormones and growth factors next. First, we will look for an overview. At times, research found cancer hormone associations with the following: hormone replacement therapy, hormonal infertility treatment, the abortion pill, contraceptive pill, anabolic steroids, tamoxifen, which is an artificial hormone for breast cancer treatment, but which increases uterine cancer, and also there have been links found with estrogen, progesterone, prolactin, testosterone, IGF-1, somatropin, VEGF, and there's a few more. In general, research found weak associations between medication and affluent cancers in the affluent countries flooded by exogenous hormones from eating an animal-based diet, and found much stronger associations in the poor countries eating a much more plant-based diet. Next, let's have a closer look at the events around one of the findings of the Women's Health Initiative. In 2002, the Women's Health Initiative found a definite association between breast cancer and hormone replacement therapy. The researchers stopped the experiment and announced their findings to the world. Consequently, about 65% of women in the US stopped hormone replacement therapy. In 2003, the US breast cancer rates dropped by 6.7%, and in 2004 there was no further drop. The sudden drop in breast cancer following the Women's Health Initiative report, followed by no further drop the year after, closely correlates with the changes in use of hormone replacement therapy. There are also World Health Organization's findings that support the hormone affluent cancer link. The World Health Organization has labeled estrogen as a type 1 human carcinogen, which means it's definitely carcinogenic. Estrogen is an HRT, and some research also strongly associates estrogen with modern dairy. There are lots of hormone cancer associations, and at least one of the hormones we are researching, estrogen, has a direct and very strong association with one of the affluent cancers, breast cancer. Keep in mind that breast cancer in turn has been linked to melanoma. If one has breast cancer, one is much more likely to get melanoma, and vice versa. In reality, there isn't two cancers that cluster together. Likely 18 out of a division of 27 cancers are clustering together. Let's summarize our specific findings. So what did we find around the affluent cancer risk factors? For genetics, we found it was weak. For pollution, pesticides and chemicals, we found it was weak. For diagnostics and record-keeping issues, we found it was weak. For reaching longer lifespans, we found it was weak. For alcohol, we found it was weak. For infections, we found it was weak. For weight and obesity, we found it was weak. For smoking, we found a small association. For the animal-based diet, we found a very significant association. For hormones, we found lots of weak links and some strong associations, which makes this significant as well. The communality, the only two cancer risk factors that gave us a definite level of significance when considering affluent cancers as a group were those containing hormones. Conclusion, there's a definite level of specificity between the affluent cancers and both exogenous hormones from animal-based food and hormonal medication. We move on to Bradford-Hill criteria number 4, dose response of the association. The following graph has the normalized affluent cancer rates for 72 countries against their normalized estimated exogenous hormone intake from 3 factors that increase exogenous hormones: the average meat intake per person per year, the average milk consumption per person per year, and the average milk yield per cow per year. The result? We see a 7-fold dose-related change in both normalized affluent cancer rates for 72 countries and their estimated exogenous hormone intake. Seeing this result is really what convinced me of a strong association between the affluent cancers and our diet. A 7-fold increase means that we could possibly bring down our affluent cancer rates by 85% by just changing diet. Since no population eats fully vegan, the gains could even be bigger. We conclude, there appears to be a strong dose-related relationship between the affluent cancer rates and the growth-stimulating hormones and growth factors coming from the animal-based food in our diet. Next, we look at Bradford-Hill criteria number 5, analogy with other observations. These 3 experimental investigations you see on the screen made a strong connection between animal protein consumption of rats and their cancer rates. The proteins consumed would have contained growth factor proteins as well. Other research demonstrated that the same protein levels coming from plants do not have a carcinogenic effect. Conclusion of analogy with other observations. There is a definite support from other observations for the notion that growth factors in the animal food could increase our affluent cancer rates. Next, we look at Bradford-Hill criteria number 6. We look at temporality, or in other words, the order in which things happen. For high cancer rates to be caused by the extra growth factors in the diet, the growth factors need to be increasing before or at the same time as the cancer rates, but never after. An increased consumption of animal food was noticed for all 15 countries researched, and all of them had affluent cancer rates increases closely following this consumption increase. Currently, China is changing its diet very fast, and its cancer rates are going through the roof. In 1950, the average Chinese ate 5 kilograms of meat per year, and currently this is well over 60 kilograms. Conclusion. The consistent temporality encountered supports the notion that animal growth factors are possibly a major drive behind the high affluent cancer rates. Bradford-Hill criteria number 7. Experimental reducibility or reversibility. There are not that many stories of people beating cancer, but a recurring factor in those that have some success is moving towards a plant-based diet. The following plant-based diets have been associated with spontaneous remissions: the macrobiotic diet, the living foods diet, the raw diet, and the McDougall diet. Dr. Kelly Turner did her PhD in spontaneous remissions. She wrote it up in a book called Radical Remission. She interviewed over 130 people in 10 countries and studied about 1,500 cases in the medical literature. One of her findings was that those people that encountered spontaneous remissions were much more likely to have moved towards a plant-based diet. We also see spontaneous remissions more likely occurring at a time in a person's life when hormone production naturally decreases. Spontaneous breast cancer remissions are rare, but when they occur, they are much more likely to occur at the time of menopause. We conclude that there is some support for cancer reversibility to be associated with a diet that avoids animal-based food and hence exogenous growth factors. We move on to Bradford-Hill criteria number 8, coherence of theory. Let's first have a look at the common flu. Every year, only about 5 to 10% of all people get the flu, but most of us get infected as it spreads so easily through droplets created during coughing and even normal talking. Those of us that do not get the flu appear to have an immune system that can cope with the infection. We can see that the cause of the flu is the infection. We can see that our own immune system is a mitigating risk factor as it reduces the chance to get the flu. And we can see that contributing risk factors to getting the flu are being run down and an unhealthy lifestyle. So we have causational risk factors, mitigating risk factors, and contributing risk factors, all influencing our disease rates. All other risk factors have no direct impact on the disease under study, even if they are linked to the disease in another way. Cancer appears to be no different. We know that DNA damage is at the root of cancers, but not all DNA damage leads to lethal cancers, which we can see from the occasional spontaneous remissions that occur. This DNA damage in turn might have been caused by a carcinogen, or it might have occurred just randomly. Since there are so many cell divisions happening all the time, sometimes things just appear to go wrong. These spontaneous remissions show us the existence of our own body's cancer defenses, which we know as apoptosis, programmed cell death, and T cells. Our own defenses are mitigating risk factors in the cancer rates, and so is a healthy lifestyle. We also know that at least for some cancers, growth-stimulating factors make the cancer rates significantly higher. The cancer risk factors of interest are more than just the cause and are less than all the risk factors combined, as not all risk factors cause, contribute, or mitigate cancer. The final detectable cancer rate appears to be the sum of the DNA damage minus the efforts of our own immune system plus the stimulation by growth factors. there is a definite coherence of theory. We move on to the last of the Bradford-Hill criteria, which is number 9, biological plausibility. Can we find biological explanations and support for the influence of growth factors on cancer rates? Growth stimulation could well counteract the efforts of our natural cancer defenses through upsetting the natural balance. Growth stimulation might cause cancer cell division before apoptosis or T-cell activity can enter life of a cancer cell, and in doing so, the growth factors would be shifting the balance in favor of the disease. Diabetes type 2, osteoporosis, heart disease, atherosclerosis, and some autoimmune diseases are strongly linked to an omnivorous diet, as Dr. John McDougall, Dr. Neil Barnard, Dr. Michael Greger, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Colin Campbell, and many others have shown. Hence, our findings of the same diet reducing cancers fits into the bigger picture of other diseases, which in turn will increase the plausibility. Our findings fit in with the findings of Craig and Bradley Wilcox, who researched longevity on Okinawa, Japan. They found a more plant-based diet is associated with living longer. Dan Buettner and his National Geographic team researched longevity all over the planet and found longevity pockets in Japan, Greece, Italy, US, and Costa Rica, which they called the blue zones. They also found that a more plant-based diet is associated with longevity. Hence, our findings not only fit the picture of diseases, but also that of longevity. Finally, there is the notion that we appear to have been tricked by our own brain. We know that processed food is less healthy for us. We can eat processed food because our brains invented them in the first place. The animal food is no different, actually. It is also because of our brains that we eat animal food, as we invented hunting, weapons, trapping, animal husbandry, selective breeding, and the Industrial Revolution that allows us to eat as much animal food as we want. Conclusion of biological plausibility. Looking at the communality of cancers with growth factors, which is growth, looking at the communality of the low-fat whole plant-based diet found to be the best at preventing and fighting both cancers and also other chronic diseases, looking at the low-fat whole plant-based diet supporting longevity, and looking at the fact that we eat animals for the same reason as we eat processed food, which we know is less healthy, it would strongly appear that biologically it is very plausible that the growth factors from the animal food are the main drive behind the high affluent cancer rates. Considering all evidence just presented, it would appear that the hypothesis stating that the natural hormones stimulating growth and the growth factors, both coming from the animal-based food, are indeed likely the main cause of our high affluent cancer rates. We might have to revise the idea that humans are omnivorous, and indeed we might have to define more closely or differently what an omnivore actually is meant to be. That really finished off the main cancer section. Next, we will tidy up some loose ends and have a closer look at some peripheral aspects of this cancer research. We will look for other hormonal effects. We will look closer at dairy, melanoma, longevity, and we will look for a historical perspective, and we will wonder if we should be surprised. And then we look at industrial responsibilities. Other hormonal effects apart from cancer. Possibly some or all of the items on the list below are linked to our exogenous hormone intake. People grow taller nowadays, women grow bigger breasts. 100 to 150 years ago, the menopause, the last menstruation in a woman's life, came a couple of years earlier, and the menarche, which is the first menstruation, came 3 to 5 years later than nowadays. The extended fertility time we have nowadays increases a woman's lifetime estrogen load and likely their breast cancer risk. Hot flushes, the Japanese culture doesn't even have a term for this. Endometriosis, uterine tissue growing outside the uterus, morning sickness, infertility problems, and PMT. Dairy. There is research that found that our modern industrially produced dairy has estrogen levels up to 33 times the natural ones, and progesterone levels of 8 to 10 times the natural ones. On the screen you see a link containing references for this, the dairy.pdf. When I did the cancer research, I found an interesting apparent irregularity. Holland and Greece ate very similar amounts of meat and dairy, but there was a twofold difference in their affluent cancer rates. At first, this did not fit in with most of the rest of the findings, till I looked a bit deeper into the Greek dairy industry. The Greeks get only 40% of the milk from cows, the rest is from goats and sheep. Holland gets nearly 100% from cows. Also, the milk yield per cow per year is about half in Greece. This indicates that the influence of modern dairy on the affluent cancer rates is probably significantly bigger than the influence exerted by meat. This fits in with the high dairy hormone levels from research. So one aspect of the more healthy side of the Mediterranean diet is that the Mediterranean dairy is less pushed. That doesn't make it healthy though. Dairy could well be the most cancer-promoting food commonly consumed. Melanoma. When comparing predominantly white populations over the planet, the dietary factor in the high Australian melanoma rates appears to be at least of the same magnitude as the UV, possibly even bigger. There are studies linking dairy with raised estrogen levels, and others linking estrogen with breast cancer. Other studies again linked breast cancer to melanoma, so in the end, dairy likely links to melanoma as well. This fits in with women with their higher estrogen levels having higher melanoma rates than men. This also explains the higher melanoma rates of countries with modern dairy industries like Canada, Norway, Sweden and Finland. A bit more on longevity. Longevity has improved through better hygiene and sanitation, and also through the invention of antibiotics and immunization. But longevity is negatively influenced by eating more processed food and animal-based food. Dan Buettner, Bradley Wilcox and Craig Wilcox found record longevity not associated with affluence really, but with a plant-based diet and other lifestyle factors. Longevity has given us false security. We can do better still. A historical perspective. The human omnivore is a primate that originally ate plants, but thanks to his brain power managed to start eating other animals. The human invented weapons, tactics, animal husbandry, selective breeding, cooking, etc. Another brainchild, the Industrial Revolution, allowed him to eat animals on a truly large scale. Thanks to other brainchildren like hygiene, sanitation, antibiotics and immunization, he now lives longer. The longer lifespan has lulled him into thinking that he's on the right track, but from a health perspective he's actually still a plant eater. In some ways, Homo sapiens is being fooled by his own brain. The teacher would say, Homo sapiens does okay, but could do significantly better still if he applied himself. Doctors Dino and his Caldwell assistant John McDougall, Neil Barnard and others say, stop getting cancers, diabetes type 2 and heart disease, and revert the health crisis by eating the food you are meant to eat. Low fat, starchy, whole plants only, and have a B12 supplement. From the cancer perspective developed here, these doctors are perfectly correct. Should we be surprised by the hormonal influence on cancer rates? Well, not really, as we can also see the influence of our own hormone production on some affluent cancers. Orchidectomy, which is the removal of the testicles, has been linked to increased prostate cancer survival. Testicles produce the hormone testosterone. Oophorectomy, which is the removal of the ovaries, has been linked to a reduction in endometriosis, uterine cancer, breast cancer, and ovarian cancer. The ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. During pregnancy, a woman's chances to get breast cancer and melanoma noticeably increase, which is consistent with her elevated hormone levels. Females have a slightly higher chance to get melanoma, indicating that there is likely a female hormone influence as well. There is a rare but definite pattern of spontaneous breast cancer remission at the time of menopause, which is consistent with the women's decreasing hormone levels. Breast cancer rates progressively increase with age till menopause. At that point, there is still some breast cancer rate increase with age, but significantly less. Again, this is consistent with women's decreasing hormone levels. The industry's social responsibilities. We will look at the following: the tobacco industry, healthcare costs, and wolves in sheep's clothing. The clearest example of the complete absence of any social responsibility we get from the tobacco industry. Let's have a closer look. In The Cigarette Century, Dr. Alan Brandt points out that between 1900 and 1999, 100 million people died prematurely because of tobacco-related illnesses. That is more than the First and Second World Wars together. Currently, the industry produces more cigarettes than ever before, exporting to the Third World countries. The industries only look for profits. Not one CEO of a tobacco company has closed one single carcinogen-producing factory. More victims than the First and Second World Wars combined is no mean feat, and we just accept it. Science established a definite causational link between lung cancer and smoking in the 1950s and early 1960s. However, in 1994, more than 30 years later, 7 CEOs of tobacco companies in an American court upheld their opinion that smoking did not have any negative health effects. Denial and confusion are the name of the game of the industry seeking profits. Merchants of Doubt has been a label attached to the industry. This is also the name of a book by Naomi Oreskes, which deals with corruption. We learn the following from the tobacco industry. Profits are the only thing that counts, and the tobacco industry does not let human lives and human health get in the way of profits. Us expecting the industry to have any real social responsibilities is being stupid and gullible. The industry does not take any responsibility for our health, nor the health of our planet for that matter. However, the tobacco industry is not the only one. Let's have a look at healthcare costs and longevity. Healthcare costs. Life expectancy at the age of 5 for the USA is 80, at a cost of $8,700 per person per year. China's life expectancy at the age of 5 is 78, at a cost of $367. Vietnam's life expectancy at the age of 5 is 78, at a cost of $111. If we look at the life expectancy, it is actually not our health dollar that gives us a longevity. Countries spending only 3% of the American healthcare costs are achieving virtually the same outcome. From a longevity perspective, the capitalist system is not just inefficient, it is extremely inefficient. Capitalism is like a big cargo ship that can carry lots of cargo to very far places, but its rudder is controlled by squabbling, self-interested parties rather than public long-term interests. Conclusion of the health industry analysis: profits are the only thing that counts, and don't let human lives get in the way of healthy profits. Wolves in sheep's clothing. Most of the not-for-profit organizations appear shop fronts for the highly profitable research and pharmaceutical industries. Their advice is not science-based, but industry finance-based. The pharmaceutical industries consistently play down the role of diet, and so do processed food and meat and dairy industries. They play down, confuse, and distract. Their leading role becomes a public bleeding role. A healthy diet is the main competitor for most industries. Do we get a clear picture of cancer causes from, for instance, the Cancer Council of Australia? Well, they still recommend meat 3 to 4 times a week, plus fish, poultry and dairy. The World Health Organization has labeled one of the animal hormones as a class 1 human carcinogen and red meat as a likely cause of some cancers. The Cancer Council talks about keeping fats low in the diet. All this while concentrating on fats is confusing. We don't go to the shop to buy fat. We buy animal-based food or plant-based food. Their so-called science is heavily biased towards the interests of the industries, keeping us confused. The War on Cancer. Our title was Affluent Cancers and Diet, Unraveling the Confusion. It is time to ask who is gaining by the confusion. It becomes clear that the war on cancer can only be won if we leave commercial interests completely out of the picture. The commercial interests have hijacked the public interest. The industries that would lose from us going onto a plant-based diet are the meat industry, the dairy industry, fisheries, processed food industry, health industry, and the pharmaceutical industry. The story on climate change is very much the same. There is no money in healthy people. There is no money in dead people. The money is in the sick. There's no money in dietary advice. In contrast, healthy food opposes the interests of most industries. Hence, it's in the industry's interest to have us all confused and ignorant. There is a lot of money in confused people. I can only encourage you to leave the sheeple and join the informed people. Put the control of your health in your own hands. Educate yourself. Any questions or comments? Send me an email. I would like to thank the people in the plant-based movement for their support and guidance. The people that most inspired me to this cancer research were Dr. John McDougall and Dr. Colin Campbell. I would like to thank Dr. Alphonse Rooks from Adelaide for reviewing my draft paper on cancer and his suggestions like the use of the Bradford Hill criteria. I also would like to thank Dr. Alan Brandt for researching and writing The Cigarette Century. This in turn has made me aware that I need to thank the tobacco industry for showing us so clearly that financial interests in the end are way more important than human health or lives. Sending 100 million people to prematurely death for just profits is no mean effort. However, this figure is dwarfed by the joint efforts of the other industries. Together with Naomi Klein from This Changes Everything, the tobacco industry helped me understand where things go wrong in our capitalist world. It's simply the focus on capital and not public interests that are the problem, as we get what we focus on. We focus on capital in our society, and the public gets big financial pollution and health bills, and the industry gets our capital. The suffering that is caused by this I see as truly enormous and mostly avoidable, and this presentation is part of my contribution to end this nonsense that is happening. Keep your doctor informed of any diet changes that you implement, and keep in mind that B12 intake might be insufficient on a low-fat, whole plant-based diet. This is because B12 is a bacterial product, and we implemented hygiene. B12 is the only supplement that doctors like Dr. John McDougall recommend. Wishing you the very best of health and a bright, happy future. Peter.